Hello and welcome to the EMJ podcast with me, your host, Dr. Jonathan Sackia. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Chris McIntosh. He's a scientist at the Toronto General Hospital Research Institute, the Peter Munk Cardiac Centre, and the Joint Department of Medical Imaging at the University Health Network, and an assistant professor in the Department of Medical Biophysics at the University of Toronto. Having received his undergraduate degree and PhD from Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, Canada, Chris has gone on to become a renowned expert in medical image analysis and clinical applications of artificial intelligence, AI to you and I. He's received numerous academic awards for his work, including those from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research. Chris has worked with the Galen Group at the French National Research Institute for Digital Science and Technology, INRIA in Saclay, France, and École Centrale de Paris, and has worked as a research associate in the labs of Doctors Tom Purdy and David Jaffray. Now, Chris's lab focuses on the theory and clinical application of AI in medicine with the goal of improving patient care. Always put patients at the center of all we do. Chris has a plethora of publications under his belt and a wide range of research interests, spanning collaboration with companies to develop new technologies or solutions for diseases such as prostate and lung cancers. Outside of his work and in his youth, Chris claims that he was an avid snowboarder and golfer, sometimes both on the same day, which one of the joys of living in Vancouver, Canada. And we were chatting before about what a beautiful place that is. He still does those things when able, but he said that his main hobby nowadays is his two young children. So given how busy Chris is, it's a wonder that Dr. McIntosh could find the time to talk to us today, but I, for one, am extremely glad that he did. So welcome to the EMJ podcast, Dr. Chris McIntosh. Real honor to have you.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So, Chris, walk us through your career journey. What inspired you to focus on AI and healthcare?
So, like a lot of kids growing up in the 80s, I got interested in computers at a young age, absolutely enthralled by all the things that they could do. And as I grew up, I wanted to do a degree in computer science, naturally, originally to go in to actually develop computer games. And as I kind of stepped through my degree and learned more and more about that industry, many things that have kind of come out more recently, about it and the various kind of vitriolic nature it can have, I decided it wasn't for me. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something to help people. And in the third and fourth year of my degree, I was fortunate enough to do a research internship with a professor at my university, at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, and learn about machine learning and healthcare. And that something else I'd always been passionate about, healthcare and computer science, actually had this intersection. And there was a way I could kind of do both, and I could learn how to use computers to really help society and help Canadians.
Okay. So good on you. I remember the first time I actually looked at one of the computer games, Grand Theft Auto, and I was just astonished by how violent and misogynistic and unpleasant it really was. And I thought, if this isn't having a deleterious effect on young people, I do not know what is. It turned my stomach to see it. So I, for one, am very, very pleased that you went into medicine. So talk to us about your clinical collaborations that you've built in order to focus on problems that need solving. I was talking to someone just before we embarked on this conversation, Chris, about how important it is that clever people like you collaborate with dumb people like me and the companies that can make stuff happen to solve actual problems instead of building widgets or kit that nobody needs. So tell us about your collaborations.
So that's a great question. Happy to. So after I did my undergraduate degree, I did my graduate degree at the university, my PhD in machine learning, computer vision. And during that time, it was purely at the university. So we did a lot of great papers, a lot of really cool academic work, but it didn't feel grounded. It felt disconnected from the patient, from that next step. And so when I joined the hospital, when I came out to Toronto in 2012 and joined University Health Network, I wanted to work very closely with our clinicians and build technology that, as you said, can actually is patient centric at the start. And so all of my students work very closely with at least one clinical member on their student committees. And we've built up collaborations kind of across the hospital in different areas over the years. And the key of those collaborations is that they help actually us understand the workflow and the actual clinical needs. So rather than, being on the outside, building a technology and then kind of running around like, I've got this hammer, the whole world's a nail, I got to find somewhere to kind of fix it. It's instead, we're on the inside learning what the problems are and then going, okay, well, now what kind of machine learning and technology can we come up with that can actually help solve those problems? And then building it from the ground up to solve the problem.
Okay. And some of the collaborations that you've built, give us an example of working with a for-profit company to solve a problem. You may not, if you don't want to mention the name, that's fine if it's confidential, but.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when I first joined in 2012 as a research associate, as you mentioned, I was working with Tom Purdy and David Jaffrey. And so we kind of began working on radiation therapy in cancer. And what I learned about was that delays in cancer care can cause significantly worse outcomes for patients. And some of those delays are associated with the amount of time it takes to create a treatment plan. Not only the time that it takes, but also the quality of the plan itself has a significant impact on the patient's outcome. And so we were one of the first groups in the world to use AI to actually machine learning, computer vision specifically, to solve that problem by being able to take an image of a patient, like a CT scan of the abdomen or the chest, and actually figure out where the radiation should go to optimally treat their tumor. So we did a lot of kind of work in there. We eventually patented, licensed it, spun it out to a company, Research Laboratories, and they then got a regulatory body approved, and we now use it for care in the hospital.
That's wonderful. Must be very gratifying. So your lab's focused on advancing AI from bench to bedside. Can you explain what this means and how AI technologies are being practically employed in clinical settings today? You've given one example there, and I know it's being used, for instance, to interpret various scans to look for efficacy of various medications and do predictive analysis. So give us some examples and talk to us about AI bench to bedside.
So we when we started looking at some of these problems, we realized that a lot of AI gets stuck kind of on the bench, for lack of a better word, even though it really happens on a desktop, but the desktop sitting on a desk, so that works, and doesn't actually transition to patient care. So some of the work that we've done, as an example, the radiation therapy, we took all the way from that bench. So we started off by solving theoretical problems. We then did kind of analysis, retrospective analysis in the hospital to ensure safety. And then we went all the way to prospective clinical care, where it really is at that point impacting patients. And so that's what we mean by kind of bench to bedside. So it's all the way from doing the theoretical work to actually deploying it and actually impacting care. So in other projects, we've been building AI for diagnostics, looking at chest x-rays, for example, and doing early detection of a pneumothorax. And we've been kind of piloting how we would deploy those technologies. We deployed some technologies for detecting interstitial lung disease on CT scans. So basically, if a patient has interstitial lung disease and they're getting lung cancer radiation therapy, the lung cancer radiation therapy can aggravate the lungs even further and cause complications. So we can do some early detection and automation there. There's too much, I think, to go through in one session, but that's really the goal of every project, is to try to get it all the way to that deployment state.
Right. And of course, there are regulatory barriers, aren't there? I mean, I'm sure the regulators are still figuring out how to regulate deployment of AI. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So So transfer learning and meta learning are key methodologies, I understand, in your lab. Can you explain for those of us who are less technologically inclined what those concepts are in the context of medical AI and how they improve patient care?
Absolutely. So we'll start with the kind of the definition. Transfer learning is really just a transfer of knowledge from one machine learning model or one problem to another. So you can think of, without transfer learning, the equivalent, if I want to train a machine learning model to, let's say, diagnose a bone fracture on an x-ray, it's really like taking my infant son and trying to teach him to do it. He doesn't know anything. And so he's learning from scratch. It would really take a long time. It'd be a very painful process. And so that's how we approach machine learning a lot of the time. We start from scratch. Whereas transfer learning is about, okay, well, instead, let's start with, I'll put a person through high school, and then I'll put them through medical school, and then through a specialty, et cetera, et cetera. And you kind of start with very, very general knowledge on a very, very large scale. And then you move more specialist on a smaller scale, and then more specialist on a smaller and smaller and smaller, until you ideally get very close to the problem at hand. And the reason we want to do that, frankly, is because over the years at the hospital, I have a lot of collaborators that come to me and will ask, they want to work on a new disease or data set, but they only have maybe a few hundred patient examples. And historically in deep learning, we needed thousands or tens of thousands or millions of examples in order to learn kind of accurate models. And just, those two things weren't compatible. And so transfer learning allows us to actually build AI technologies for a wider array of diseases, including rarer diseases, that reach better accuracy with less data.
Okay. So the concept of explainable AI is becoming increasingly important, especially in healthcare. Why is it critical for AI models to be explainable in clinical environments, and how do you ensure transparency in the models that your lab develops?
So that's a good question. It's also a little bit of a provocative, kind of controversial topic in a way. So I'll start off to say I don't think it's actually a requirement that AI be explainable to be safe. And those two things, safety and explainability, often get taken kind of for granted the same thing, but they are exclusive. So explainability can help safety, but you can have safety without explainability. And an example to that is humans. We can't necessarily explain ourselves to one another, even to ourselves. We look at how medical decisions are made, and there often is inter and intra expert variability because of some of that qualitative gestalt type things that go on, because we ultimately still don't really know how the human brain works. And the current system is safe. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make AI explainable, because we can still do better. And so making AI explainable, I think, actually enables human computer interaction to a much higher degree than the AI just spitting out, a single answer, yes or no. And that interaction provides opportunity to leverage the best of what humans do in terms of compassion and deep knowledge of the situation and being able to interact and talk to the patient, et cetera, with the best that AI can do in terms of sifting through, ridiculous amounts of data and pulling up records from 100 years ago and all these sorts of fun things, and kind of then work together better. So I think explainability definitely leads us to better systems, but there are certainly examples of safe AI that can be and have been deployed that are also not explainable, as long as they've been correctly and appropriately validated.
It's an interesting concept. So we're basically holding AI to a higher standard than we would hold ourselves effectively.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Because someone I was telling a friend of mine who's much smarter than me, and I was saying I was going to be chatting to you, and he's an AI guy, and the example he gave me is, he says, self-driving cars, you have one accident, and the whole program is scrapped. Yet, in the United States, there'll be 350,000 people injured in motor vehicle accidents in the course of a year. And that's acceptable somehow.
I agree. If you can properly validate that self-driving cars are safer than humans, irregardless of them being explainable or not,
Mm-hmm.
then there's a rational argument to make that they should replace humans from the sense of saving lives.
Yeah.
And another good example that I like to give people is magnets. We all use magnets. We like using them. But ask anyone other than a really strong physicist how a magnet works, how it actually works. Yes, we know it sticks together, but how does it work?
Yeah. 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 I remember there was a book about letters or interactions with Albert Einstein. And apparently Einstein liked to talk to non-scientific groups. I understand he was, by reputation, a bit flirtatious, shall we say. And apparently he went to a luncheon for a women's luncheon. Someone asked him to explain relativity in simple terms. And he said, if a man puts his hand on a hot stove for a minute, it seems like an hour. And if a man sits next to someone he finds attractive for an hour, it seems like a minute. That's relativity. I just completely bonkers, but it tickled me. So anyway, you mentioned your work in radiation therapy, which has been commercialized and deployed globally, and some of what that process was like. Can you give us any other examples of, again, going back to this bench to bedside concept, or an example of AI where you've taken it, wouldn't it be cool if ... and you could actually make it happen?
So we can certainly walk through a few. So we also built some technology in radiation therapy around quality assurance. So imagine now that a plan has been created, because once you put radiation into a patient, you can't get it out. There is also an entire step to make sure that that plan is safe and efficacious for the patient. So quality assurance. And so we actually spun that technology out into our spin-off company from UHN called Curate Medical. And we are then working to get that now into patient care around in various hospitals around the world. And so the kind of another project we've been doing around is wearables. We've been getting some very exciting results in wearables and heart failure. We're looking to kind of move forward with some trials, some kind of validation trials of that. So early phases prior to doing an actual RCT. So we'll get there. But honestly, it's a long process. So if we look, we tend to think of like a paper as 90% of the work. And I would actually flip that around. I would say that a paper is maybe 10% of the work, and 90% of the work is really in deploying AI. And so it does take many, many, many years. So our that very first one in radiation therapy, like we built the early versions of that technology, I think in 2013 and 14. We treated the first patient in 2019. So, it's 5 or 6 years of really dedicated hard work to kind of get that all the way through. Now, the times will shorten, but they also should never be that short, of course, because we want to keep them safe.
Yeah. I think they call it O'Toole's corollary to Murphy's Law. Everything takes longer than it takes.
Yes.
So I've hinted at this. Much of your work focuses on cancer care, including prostate, lung cancer. How has AI changed the landscape of cancer diagnosis and treatment? And what do you see the next big breakthroughs in this field? What's it going to look like 10 years from now?
So I think that what it's really helping to do is break down kind of two main things. So one is efficiency. And so now it used to take us days, it used to take us many hours or days to kind of create and verify a treatment plan. And now with AI, it can be done in a matter of minutes. And so what that allows us to go to potentially is from a system where a patient was being diagnosed and it was maybe on the order of many weeks or months before treatment, to maybe they're even being treated the same week. And we know that once a cancer is found, the longer we wait before treatment, the worse a patient does. So we can kind of accelerate that care and therefore be able to kind of improve outcomes. And the other, where I think AI, and not just in cancer, but kind of across the board, is really helpful, and one of the reasons that I wanted to go into it so much, is around the universal access. So in Canada, we have a universal healthcare system, and everyone is supposed to have the same equal access to healthcare. And there's lots of studies that show that people in academic, or people that go to academic hospitals, which are typically in large urban centers like Toronto, Vancouver, etc., do better. They have better outcomes. And so AI really gives us that ability to kind of further democratize healthcare by taking that expertise that we have in Toronto from having seen 1,000 or 10,000 patients with the same disease, et cetera, and then exporting it to other locations around the city, around the country, around the globe, and giving everyone the same access level to care, which I think we can get to with AI if we all work together and keep trying to do that.
Okay. Your work also involves AI for the treatment of cardiovascular disease. Can you tell us about how AI is being used there to improve patient outcomes in this area? Any advancements that you're particularly excited about?
So, absolutely. One of the areas I'm most excited about in cardiovascular care is wearables. And I think that, to me, traditional kind of medicine, if we think about maybe 5 years ago, is often very snapshot based in a way. And so we take an X-ray, or we do an echo, or we do an ECG. There are exceptions. A Holter monitor can be over a few days and things. But in general, we're looking at small windows of a patient's life. And then when it comes to AI, we're being handed small windows of a patient's life and then being expected to predict their disease outcomes over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And with no insight into what's happening day to day. And I think wearables give us that insight into really what's going on in a patient's day-to-day life. Are they exercising? How did they get out of bed? How are they sleeping? All of these kind of insights that we previously have never had. And AI in particular, then, when you combine it with wearables, actually makes that work. Because if you went back 10 years ago and we had sophisticated technology like an Apple Watch that we have today, even if we had all that data at a hospital, well, a single patient would generate a terabyte of data in a year. So we couldn't go through it all. But when you add AI, that's very, as we talked about earlier, is very, very good at sifting through massive amounts of data. And then AI gives us this ability to go through all of that data, distill it down into useful insights, share those insights with the clinical team, and now we have this better collaboration between the patient, the AI, and the doctor, all kind of working together with this day-to-day information to hopefully reveal new insights into patient care. So in one example of that, we've been working in heart failure. We partnered with Apple a couple years ago with this goal of taking a cardiopulmonary exercise test, which, if I had one of those machines, would literally fill the entire room that I'm in right now, a great big treadmill or bicycle, and all of these devices that get hooked up to a patient. And they go through this very strenuous exercise procedure in the hospital. We measure what's called their peak VO2. Well, our hypothesis is that using the data, biometric data on an Apple Watch, we could actually measure that peak VO2 directly without needing to do the test. So we started a clinical trial, registered on clinicaltrials.gov, and go on and, of course, read about it, please. And we've finished enrolling patients now, and we're working on the analysis. The preliminary analysis has been fantastic, and we're hoping to share our publications with that soon.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the implications of this you talk about large data sets. Anyone who's been involved in a clinical trial, either a phase 3 pharmaceutical trial or a medical device trial, the amount of data is phenomenal. And, you go through the data and you suddenly go, hang on a second, there's this signal that we're seeing here in the data. But when you designed the trial, you didn't power the trial to look for that signal, and you didn't put that in your indications to the regulators. So basically everyone says, you're data mining. And data mining was, prior to this era, considered a no-no. You're not a serious scientist if you're doing data mining. You're crooked somehow. But that's what AI gives us the power to do. It gives us the power to spot stuff that could save or improve people's lives, right? I mean, am I missing something?
No, you're right. It's one of those, it's a very double-edged sword. for lack of a better word. So you could use AI to sift through and look at every possible hypothesis of a data set. And that could go badly, because what happens is your chances of false discovery start kind of growing exponentially the more and more and more and more and more and more things that you test. But as long as you apply the appropriate statistical corrections for all of that, then it can be done appropriately. And so it's one of those things. It's a, if you do it right, it's totally fine. And if you don't, like anything in science, if you don't kind of take your time and do it appropriately, then it doesn't work out.
Yeah. Interesting. So AI in healthcare, AI generally raises questions around bias, fairness, and of course, the concerns of the naysayers. How does your lab address the potential for bias in AI models, especially when working with diverse patient populations? And what would you say to those who think that we are bringing about the apocalypse, that, the Terminator movie it's coming? So yeah, two-part question for you, Chris.
Okay, so let's tackle the first part first. I think it's worthwhile to kind of separate bias and fairness a little bit. So fairness, I think, really talks about the fairness and the equity of a model. So making sure that it's equally accurate for every different representational group, which is absolutely important. And bias talks about the biases that exist in a model that might change its accuracy, for good or for bad. So they are interrelated, and they're also a little bit separate. So I think the first thing you try to do is control for any biases during the development of a model. And that kind of starts with good science. And people often think that, machine learning is a cure-all in some ways, and AI. But I like to remind people that it doesn't change the laws of physics. It doesn't change the laws of math. It plays under the same realms as everything else. So one of my favorite books is actually, is Rigor Mortis. And it's a science book, but it's about the study of scientific failures. And there's lots of really, really cool examples in this book, but there's examples of scientific studies that failed replication because the healthy mice were treated by someone who smelled one way, and the sick mice were treated by someone who smelled another way, and the smell actually impacted the mice. And so it's all about how these confounders that we never thought about can sink in. And if you let those sink into an AI model, they create bias. So we spend a lot of time in my lab just doing science and really thinking about, okay, are we collecting this data the right way? Is the data itself balanced and fair? And if the data is balanced and fair, the machine learning model that results from learning on it will be balanced and fair. Because AI doesn't inherently have any of the biases or things that we as humans do and have grown up with. It just wants to optimize its objective function. And its objective function is to be as accurate for as large amount of the data as is possible. So if you train an AI model on 90% male data and 10% female data, well, it just learns to be more accurate for male data as opposed to female data. But if you train it on 50-50, well, then it learns, okay, I have to be equally accurate for both. Does that make sense? So we kind of, it's really all at the start of the process. So one of our recent papers in NPJ Digital Medicine is about how we can actually then build techniques and tools to look at a data set and analyze and discover those biases using machine learning. And then we can actually you can almost think of grade that data set in a way of saying, well, if you learn an AI model on this data set, 20% of your AI model is going to be biased. And therefore, if you deploy it, even if you think it's going to be 80% accurate, it actually will end up only being 60%.
That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So
that was part one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just
Part two, the Terminator. I think that, to be a little tongue in cheek, I know I haven't done anything yet because Arnold hasn't come back in time for me. I think that's my safe one. But in truth, safety in AI is absolutely critical. We cannot get away from safety in AI. And so current AI systems, they don't present Terminator-like threats. They're not that intelligent. We're absolutely not there yet. We could be at some day. And so what a lot of researchers like Geoffrey Hinton are arguing for, and I agree with them, is that if we don't look into safety, then we'll get there before we know what to do. And so we're not arguing that we're currently at an apocalypse and that we should stop AI research. We're arguing that safety research in AI is important and should also be funded by governments and companies and organizations around the world, so that when we do eventually build that artificial general intelligence, we know what to do to keep it safe and to make sure it actually does good for society as opposed to bad.
Yeah. And if anyone is not familiar with, if there's one person out there who's not familiar with the Terminator movies, it's basically that on a given date, the US government empowers something called Skynet to protect the United States effectively from an existential threat. And Skynet, the AI, works out that the existential threat to humanity is humanity. So it sets out to destroy humanity. So, of course, maybe you could go on to ChatGPT or one of these things and saying, how do we make sure that we don't let AI run away with the crown jewels? Fascinating. So how do you envision AI evolving in healthcare over the next decade? Maybe that's too long. Over the next period of time, are there particular challenges or opportunities that excite you as we integrate AI further into patient care? Are you going to do away with doctors, for instance?
Absolutely not. That would be, if we let it do away with doctors, I think that would be a failure and a travesty. The doctors that I work with at the hospital are unbelievable human beings who truly care about patients. And I don't think we can trust an AI currently at this stage to have anywhere near that level of real empathy. And so I think that there are challenges and there are opportunities, absolutely. And there's a great quote out there that I'll kind of repeat. It's that I don't think AI will replace doctors, but doctors who use AI will replace doctors who don't. And
well said.
That is what really, we talked about a little bit earlier about how, explainable AI could enable AI, and wearables and all these different technologies enable doctors and AI to work, and patients as well, to all work better together as a team in that collaborative environment. So I think that's really the opportunity over the next 10 years, is to build AI into workflows in a way that improves patient care in a collaborative environment. So actually giving back doctors more time with patients, kind of returning that humanity to medicine, not getting to a point where, a patient walks into a room and it's just a computer screen and they just, do their visit with the screen and then leave. That sounds like a dystopian nightmare to me, even as an AI researcher.
Yeah, but I think that's well said. Doctors who use AI will replace doctors who don't. I think but that's been the case with all advances in medicine, right?
Yes, and technology and society in general. Absolutely.
I mean,
I'm sure there are people who don't want to use calculators, but those of us who use calculators, we're a lot more productive.
Yeah, in my field in surgery, those of us, who were doing laparoscopic, minimally invasive procedures, people who weren't doing laparoscopic gallbladder surgery, cholecystectomy, they weren't doing cholecystectomy because the patient said, okay, so I can go to this doctor or I can go to this doctor. Yeah, I'll go to this one. I'll be out of hospital in one day, and so on and so forth. One thing I'll tell you, I do a fair bit of writing, Chris, and for giggles, I've tried asking AI to write an article.
Yes.
And I like injecting humor into what I write, and double entendres and, alliteration and such like. AI doesn't have a sense of humor, and that which it does attempt to do is cringeworthy. You've heard the expression dad jokes. It can't even do dad jokes. So I still think I'm going to have to keep writing, and I love the privilege of doing it. So Chris, in closing, a question I like to ask all of my guests: if a magic genie could grant you 3 wishes in your area of interest in AI and so on and so forth, what would you wish for? What would your wishes be?
That's a fun one. So I think any self-respecting AI researcher, their first wish is going to be all of the graphics processing units in the world. That's our bread and butter right now. So those are the technologies that we actually use to train AI models, and we need more of them. So that would certainly be the first wish. The second, I think, would be data. So data is the other thing that we need to make AI successful. We want to have data on everything. So I think if you're kind of an AI researcher, you subscribe to this quasi-philosophical view that if you had enough data on any given disease, that you could diagnose it or cure it, et cetera, at 100% accuracy. That's so effectively that there isn't randomness. Everything is quantifiable and predictable. If we just had enough data. And so as AI researchers, we always want more data, higher resolution, more patients, et cetera, newer modalities, all these sorts of things. So definitely all the data. And the third, I think, would be the funding to do very, very kind of high risk research. And there's been a lot of, I think in many, many countries around the world, there's been a lot of kind of lack of growth of funding of academic research in general. They've kind of stayed, academic research funding levels have stayed very fixed in many countries, including in Canada, for the last 10, 20 years. And there's been small growths here and there. And so as the pools get smaller, naturally, we get more and more conservative and risk averse about what we should fund. And so I would say the funding to do those kind of crazy, not even moonshot, like Neptune shot ideas that would just change everything. I'd like to get back to doing, even more of that than we do right now.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful, fascinating. So sadly, that's what we've got time for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Chris McIntosh for being with us. Real pleasure chatting with you and being educated by you. Unless, of course, I'm not speaking to Chris McIntosh and you're an AI avatar.
Honestly, we're not that far off for being able to do that kind of stuff. But no, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this and learned a lot speaking to you as well.
Oh, thank you. So, folks, if you've enjoyed this episode, and I guess if you're still listening at this point, you have, please subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Like us, leave us a review, all that stuff. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues. And please join us next week for another fascinating episode. Until then, I'm Dr. Jonathan Sackier. Thank you for listening to the EMJ podcast. Please, everyone, stay safe, stay well, stay curious. Bye for now.